Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET. I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, and you have found us here at Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, where every Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, we bring you an interview with a wonderful new author to talk about an amazing new book. And today is no different. I cannot wait for you to hear our author today. As I said, I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My current thriller is Her Perfect Life, which you can see casually on the door behind me. And my new book is The House Guest, which is sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise, and that will be out in February. But today, the center of attention, oh my golly, is Katy Hays. We are going to talk with Katy Hays, who is in California. I am in Boston, about her debut fantastic novel, The Cloisters. Oh my goodness, you all. This is amazing. It is unique. It is original. It is twisty. It is unpredictable. It's really thought-provoking and quite immersive. I've had so many friends, and I so agree with them, saying, oh my golly, I couldn't put this down. I could not put this down. And I will tell you that this book, Katy Hays' debut, is a Today Show Read with Jenna book club pick, which is about as good as it gets. And I'm going to read you one thing that I'm going to ask you about. Look, ooh, the sticker on the front, the sticker, love the sticker. This says, Jenna Bush Hager says, for fans of the talented Mr. Ripley and the secret history, what could be better than that? The perfect mystery for fall. And that is The Cloisters. Hold up your copy, Katy, too, because I see how it's metallic and it's shiny. Ooh, that's beautiful. And it has Jenna Bush Hager. Well, that must have been a fun phone call to get when you found out about that.
Yeah, it was incredible, actually. I feel like it's every debut novelist's dream.
Well, tell us what happened. Did you get a phone call or an email, and who said what, and what did they say?
Yeah, I think that my editor heard before I did, and she was really anxious to protect me from getting my hopes up. And so they handled a lot of the early conversations. And I heard from my editor, actually, that it was going to be a Read with Jenna pick. And I was so thrilled. I have been obsessed with her list for so long. So it felt like a wonderful place for The Cloisters to land. And like I said, it really does feel like a dream come true for any novelist to get one of those big celebrity book club picks. It just means that many more people get their eyes on your writing.
I mean, you work by yourself alone on this book. And at some point today, or when your debut was last week, it's going to go out into the public, and real people are going to actually read it. And that's always a moment.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And I think I've been really nervous about seeing the book make its way in the wider world. And I think it's ended up being really exciting to see the way readers are connecting with the story.
And I hear so much buzz about this book. And I want you to look at Susie Baldwin is saying, congrats, Katy. And over in the comments, Shannon Hansen is here, and Susie Baldwin is here, and Brenda Gaskell is here, and Renee is here. So nice. And everybody's cheering for your gorgeous cover. And you will cheer as well, you all, when you read what's inside the covers of this marvelous book. Quickly, if you are new to A Mighty Blaze, wow, Crime Time, you have picked exactly the right day to be here. A Mighty Blaze was started about 2.5 years ago by the incredible powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were all completely freaking out. And this was a place to talk about books and talk about authors and discover new books. And we have been going strong ever since. And it is so wonderful for us to see all of you here today. Here's Deborah today, who says, I've heard a lot about your book. Congratulations, says Deborah. And Renee says, how exciting, Katy. And people are arriving to hear about The Cloisters by Katy Hays. I'm going to take 10 more seconds and tell you a tiny bit about Katy Hays, so you have a little bit of background, and then I'll finally let her talk. Katy Hays is a writer and adjunct art history professor in California, where she teaches rural students from Truckee to Tacoma. And she will explain to us where that is if you don't know. I found out about 10 minutes ago. She holds an MA in art history from Williams College and pursued her PhD at UC Berkeley. Having previously worked at major art institutions, including the Clark Art Institute, I know it well and have been there a million times, and SF MoMA, she now lives with her husband and dog Queso in Olympic Valley, California. The Cloisters is her first novel, and oh my golly, you all, for a first novel or a millionth novel, hi Diane, it is absolutely great. Just in your words, tell us about this book, just for a little bit of an overview, and welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, The Cloisters is the story of Anne Stillwell, who's a recent college graduate who arrives in New York City hoping to work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and she ends up reassigned to their medieval museum, the Cloisters. And it's a story of coming of age, it's a story about academic obsession. And while at the Cloisters, she falls under the spell of two of her really glamorous and compelling coworkers, the chief curator and her coworker Rachel Mondre. And it's a story about their discovery of a 15th century deck of tarot cards that may or may not actually hold the key to telling the future. And Anne ends up really needing those deck of cards because a murder breaks the delicate balance between the researchers, and she needs to rely on the cards to see what may have happened and keep one step ahead.
Katy, I mean, you all who are listening now, I know that you all have your fingers poised on buy buttons, because that is an absolutely irresistible description. And you can see why people, including me, are calling this absolutely immersive and gorgeous and atmospheric and thought-provoking. There are really three tracks of talking about this book, and I want to talk about each of them. One of them is sort of the plot of the book, just the story of what happens. One is the sort of history of the tarot cards and medieval art and the cloisters and all, you know, this setting and everything that just lusciously weaves into this. And then there's also sort of the philosophy, the thought-provoking what if kind of element about belief and about predicting the future. So I want to talk about all of those. But first, the plot. You were talking a little bit about this young art history student, very fish out of water, gets a job that seems to be by luck or fate, or we don't really know. And the characters that you described, there is Rachel, and there is Patrick, and there is then Leo. And those triangles, there are layers of triangles of those characters. Talk a little bit about those characters and that structure.
Yeah, for me, I'm really interested in environments that feel really claustrophobic in novels. And so I like my characters to feel on top of one another and almost like they can't escape one another. And so for me, I was really interested in creating that kind of environment, that atmosphere. And each of these characters really wants something from one another. They all are trying to kind of extract value from those relationships, whether it's a mentorship relationship or a friendship or a romantic relationship. I'm really interested in that dynamic of how each character is looking to get something from the other one, also in a way to get ahead and kind of get a more purchase.
And you bring this fish out of water, Anne Stillwell, the art student, into this claustrophobic atmosphere at the Cloisters of academic competition, where people want something so deeply, and they often don't say very clearly out loud what it is. They only know it for themselves. It's gaslighty, it's manipulative, and in comes Anne, who just wants to be a part of this. Talk a little bit about Anne and where she came from.
Yeah, I am really interested in, as a writer and as a person, in these kinds of cultural clashes, right? As you say. And for me, it was really interesting to think about what would happen if someone had grown up in a place like Walla Walla, which I should say, apologies to Walla Walla right off the bat, because I love Walla Walla. And I know it gets a bit of a bad rap in the book. But I was really curious what it would be like for a character to come from that kind of environment to a place like Manhattan in the summer, and especially to a place like the Met, to the Cloisters. And so for me, I think that kind of dynamic, when someone is completely unfamiliar with the world around them, can lead to some really interesting choices and some really interesting decisions. And of course, in the case of Anne, it's a world that she desperately wants to be a part of, right? She isn't just kind of being thrown into this against her will. She's so eager to be part of this to be part of this art world, to be part of the museum, and to be as engaged as she sees Rachel, her coworker, as being, who's very familiar with kind of the political ins and outs of museum politics and academia. And I think Anne is really interested in adapting to that environment and almost hewing herself to the city in a way that feels really authentic to, many young women who arrive in New York every year looking to remodel themselves into something
And
entirely.
she wants to remind. Rachel is such the it girl. She is everything that Anne ever wanted to be. She has standing. She has glory. She has intellect. She has insight. She has a lot of money, and she absolutely knows how that world works. And you can feel Anne sort of following after her and almost lusting after who she is. Talk about that relationship. This sort of, it's just one of your many rave reviews said the book is sultry, and you can just feel that summer heat of Manhattan permeate the book.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by female friendships in novels. And I think in particular, female friendships can sometimes be more toxic, more romantic, more fulfilling than love interests in books. And so I'm really interested in the way women interact with one another as friends. And also in the case of Anne and Rachel, as competitors. And so for me, I really wanted this kind of dynamic in the book where one character had so much, the other character didn't have very much at all, and how they were negotiating that, and also how one character was basically trying to pull herself up to that level, and what that kind of clawing and that hard scrabble looks like. And so for me, it's that dynamic in a lot of female friendships that can be very complicated that I wanted to explore between Rachel and Anne.
And Rachel even gives her clothes, and there's this moment where you think, oh, am I going to accept someone's charity of clothes? On the other hand, they're perfect and they fit perfectly and they look beautiful, and sort of turning herself into someone else. This transformation is partly what this book is about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. The book, a lot of reviews have talked about it being in the genre of dark academia, which is so popular right now. And I think one of the things that we find so compelling about campus novels and books that are set at schools is that they're really these closed worlds where people come and you leave behind your family and friends and you can make yourself into something entirely different. And I think it's that sense of possibility and also how easily those reinventions go off the wheels that is really attractive about these kinds of books.
And as we learn, as the book progresses, Anne is really desperate to reinvent herself. But talk about closed environments. The cloisters, where much of this book takes place. I mean, all the settings are immersive and gorgeous. But from moment one, when you take us through your words, which are astonishing, and I will tell you, I will confess, if you look at these pages, can you see I've just pushed down the corners of every page that's wonderful, and I just started ruining the whole advanced reader copy. So I figure, okay, but your descriptions are lush and gorgeous, and you can almost feel the atmosphere. You can almost see this museum and how, I mean, everybody has seen it, just that snippet of it up in high above the city. Talk a little bit about the cloisters and what that is and why that draws you so.
Yeah, I should say first off, as a reader and as a writer, I have always loved books that are really atmospheric. When I was younger, it was really the way I traveled. It was the
Mhm.
most accessible form of travel, was being able to open a book and be in a completely different place. And I think for me, as like I said, as a reader and a writer, that's always something that matters to me a lot. And so naturally, I kind of turned to looking at atmosphere when I was crafting this novel. And the Cloisters, which is actually a 12th century monastery that was rebuilt by hand in Fort Tryon Park at the northern tip of Manhattan. That's where the book takes place. And to me, it felt like such a wonderful setting for a novel for so many reasons. I mean, first of all, it's a 12th century monastery in one of the world's biggest, most populous, well, not most populous, but one of the world's biggest and kind of most dynamic cities. And so I felt like that kind of difference already, the kind of this very medieval feel against the very contemporary and modern Manhattan skyline. I was really interested in that. And I was really interested in the way the museum itself is kind of orphaned at the tip of Manhattan and is really a world unto itself. And so I don't actually remember that there was a moment where I consciously chose to set the book at the cloisters. It almost just happened naturally as the book began. I mean, it was never a question that that's where it would be set.
You had been there in the past, right? And do you remember when you take us, if you just arrived, we're talking about the brand new The Cloisters by Katy Hays, which is all the buzz, and it is a Jenna Hager Bush pick for the Today Show. I know I can say this. It's a Jenna Bush Hager pick for the Today Show. Jenna reads book club. You know what I'm talking about. And it is marvelous and atmospheric and wonderful. And Katy, and we are talking with Katy Hays, now the author, about the actual place, the cloisters. When you take us into the cloisters in the book, we can almost feel the darkness and the beauty and the glittering tapestry and the reliquaries and the art and the gardens. Talk a little bit about how you felt walking in there. Do you remember that and how it tucked away in your brain?
Yeah, I have a real soft spot for medieval architecture. And so I visited the cloisters in 2016. And at the time, obviously, wasn't working on a novel, wasn't thinking about where I might set a novel. I was just there as a visitor to see an exhibition. And the museum itself is really remarkable and really striking. And in a city that is full of remarkable and striking museums, I really feel like it stands out as a very unusual place in the city. I mean, first of all, it feels almost bucolic in the setting in the park. And then you have this incredibly reconstructed cloister and series of gardens. And to me, the entire collection that's housed there is just incredible. I mean, it's beautiful, it's sparkling. Like you said, it's gorgeous. It's gem encrusted and golden and just dynamic. And it's a place that also doesn't get that much traffic, which is really, really surprising to me. And I feel like I really enjoyed going to the cloisters and having it be this sort of world apart, but also be so much in the city of New York. And I think that's something that's really wonderful about it. And if you've ever had a chance to kind of step into a medieval building, you get that immediate almost temperature change when you step in, right? There's a sort of stillness to the air, a coolness. And I think that's really what I was looking to capture, is this really atmospheric, moody, dark, but also really delightfully dramatic aspect of the cloister.
And you can feel that as Anne enters for the first time, and you can feel her yearning to look at things up closely and study things. And Rachel just drags her through, because for her, this is where she works, and this is a place of business. And we enter the cloisters with Anne, and we're transformed by it with Anne as well. And I'm seeing more and more people come in here. Susie and Janine and Renee. Nice to see Darlene, all of you. We're talking about the cloisters, and the gardens of the cloisters too play a huge role in that. Talk a little bit about the gardens too.
Yeah, so technically the term cloister refers to a medieval garden. And the gardens at the cloisters, and this is not something I made up, this is true. The Metropolitan Museum of Art maintains 3 beautiful gardens at the Cloisters Museum, and each of them is planted in a different way. So some of them are planted with just wildflowers, some of them are planted with fruit trees, and the garden that I was most interested in for the purpose of the novel is the fact that the cloisters also plants a medieval herb garden full of poisons and potions and herbs that would have been used by medieval medics, basically, to doctor people. And in particular, for the book, the plant that matters the most is the belladonna plant, which is actually named Beautiful Woman because in the Renaissance, people would take very small doses of it to enlarge the pupils. And this was supposed to be incredibly attractive, that you would have enlarged pupils. And so women would take it as this kind of beauty enhancing drug, but it is also, of course, very poisonous if taken in large quantities.
And I love that you said, I did not make this up, because I can't wait to ask you, and I won't any longer. I mean, are you a medievalist, and how much research did you have to do to make this book feel so authentic. It's incredibly authentic.
Yeah, I actually am not a medievalist. I, as a graduate student, was a modernist,
Uh,
but I'm lucky to have some very good friends who are medievalists, and they were incredibly helpful in the writing of this book. And also, as an academic, you're a fairly trained and seasoned researcher at this point. And so for me, doing the research itself, that part I really enjoyed. I love nothing more than going down a deep rabbit hole on a topic. And so for me, it was really fun to kind of immerse myself in a subject that, although I, of course, have studied in the past, is not my specialty. And I really felt like that was remarkable to just have an opportunity to kind of travel through medieval art history through this book and through the research I did.
And you take us on that journey as well. You take us traveling through art history as well. And I have to say that as a result of reading The Cloisters, I felt like I learned something. I feel that I've really, my knowledge about this period of time and these kinds of artifacts has really been elevated. And I love that. I mean, it's not, Tess Gerritsen used to talk about how when authors' research slips were showing, when they were just tried to pack too much stuff in a story and it showed. And this is just seamless. We're learning about it with with Anne. We're learning about it with Anne, and we just love it. And one of the things that we learn about is tarot cards. And that tarot cards, as you spoke of, and I'd love you to talk more about this, is the pivotal element of this novel. Talk a little bit about that and how you chose that and how much is real and what it means.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think obviously, if you have been on social media recently, or if you've been to a bookstore recently, you've seen how popular tarot cards have become kind of in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment. And so for me, I, as a writer, am really interested in the question of what are we capable of believing in, right? Whether that's a charismatic con man or astrology or manifesting, or in the case of the cloisters, tarot. And so for me, I really came to tarot from that perspective. What are we capable of believing in? Under what conditions would it be possible that you could believe in something you saw in the cards? And really, for me, tarot in the 15th century, sort of the tarot that takes place in the novel, it's an older form. And so really, it relies so much not just on the idea that you might be able to tell the future through tarot cards, but also I was really interested in excavating these questions around fate and free will and chance as they were played out during this time period. And I really think for me, tarot is this interesting intersection of the way life can kind of turn on a knife's edge almost, right? I mean, depending on what card you pull, it can be positive or it can be negative. And I think that there is a little bit of that unknown in all of our day-to-day lives. And I was really interested in sort of exploring that more.
It isn't when you talk about depending on which card you pull, that could be metaphorical or an actual tarot card, because so much of life seems like it is basically unpredictable. And there's this overweening question in the book: if you could know if tarot cards are predictive, then would you want to know? And how much would we want to know? And the other question of what if it were true? Talk about, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm really interested in the question. I'm very pragmatic as a person and as a writer. And generally speaking, I don't believe that we can tell the future. But that said, I also often think that there have to be some things that are just out there waiting for us, that were meant for us. I think many of us have had that kind of experience, right? You leave your house 5 minutes late and you miss like a terrible accident on the freeway, or you decide to go to a bar one night with a friend when you really don't want to go and you end up meeting your spouse there. I mean, these are the kinds of things that feel like chance, but can so easily actually be turned into kind of fate, right? It was meant to happen. You were meant to meet, you were meant to miss the accident, whatever that is in your life. And so I think there's this idea with tarot that you can, find your way through that randomness, right? That you might be able with tarot to know what's waiting for you, what your fate is. And I think that comes with it a kind of power that feels very intoxicating, and certainly feels intoxicating to the characters in the book.
And but there's a difference between predictive and sort of predestined. You know, if something can be predictive, and this is so fascinating to all of us, does that mean there's nothing you can do? I mean, I remember the scene in Lawrence of Arabia where Lawrence saves someone and someone says to him, "You shouldn't have done that. He is supposed to die. It is written." And Lawrence of Arabia says, "Nothing is written." And then, of course, something happens else that I'm not going to tell you if you all haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia, but if you haven't, why not? But that's, I've thought about that ever since. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Nothing is written. And that's the thing about tarot cards, because if you can predict the future, then some universe knows the thing.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of our contemporary fascination with things like tarot cards and astrology and manifesting and kind of modern day witchiness that we see really resurging right now, I think so much of that is the desire to navigate and negotiate that uncertainty, right? We don't, as humans, we don't love sitting with that kind of uncertainty. We don't love not knowing what waits for us in our future or what we can control and what we can't control. And so I think actually, weirdly, tarot and these other practices give us this sense of control and give us this sense of vision of being able to see into the future. And I think that's really attractive to people. I think it's a really natural impulse.
Sure, we want to know something, and the world is so chaotic and so in disequilibrium right now that it would be so reassuring actually to know someone. But in your book, The Cloisters, Anne begins to think more about that and how much she might learn from these special tarot cards. And she also sometimes withholds that information, decides she's not going to share it with someone else. And that's a power as well.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting aspect of the novel that you're bringing up, because I also think one of the things about the novel, The Cloisters, it's about what we can and can't see from one another, right? What secrets we're keeping, why we're keeping those secrets. And even when we know somebody really well, the fact that they might be holding things back from us. And Anne is surrounded by people who are holding things back from her. And so not sharing her knowledge of the cards and what she's seen with those around her is her way, I think, of kind of wresting some of that control back into her own hands. I think a lot of the book, and I think a lot of tarot too, turns on the question of agency, right? Who has the power? Who has the agency? Who gets to make the decisions? And I think that's a really interesting question, especially when we're talking about young women in new environments and how they will be able to kind of use their power in effective ways.
I love that about empowerment, using their power in effective ways, whether it has to do with metaphorically or physically with tarot cards, or whether it's with their place in the universe and their relationships with other people, and who's going to come out on top. And you always keep us guessing in The Cloisters. I mean, Katy, I was turning the pages as fast as I could, and I kept saying slow down because I didn't want to miss the gorgeous, gorgeous writing and the gorgeous characterization and the absolutely amazing atmosphere and the surprises the gasp-worthy surprises all along the way. So congratulations on this. Before we get, it's just great. I mean, I'm babbling now and gushing because it's just so uniquely wonderful. If someone asks you, do you want to have your tarot cards read? What do you say?
I'm actually very easily scared by tarot cards. So although I would love to do a good reading someday, I have done some readings for myself, and I'm really surprised by how easily just a card that I don't want to see turning up in my reading can really spin me out. So I'm not sure that I necessarily want to know, to be honest. I think I fall
I
into
always
the
say no. I always say no, because what if it's true? I don't want to know it. And I keep thinking it could mean anything. And I just don't want to deal with that. It's funny. One of my half sisters was in California. This is years ago, driving over a bridge, the Bay Bridge in California. and she felt this weird feeling, and she thought maybe she had a flat tire, and she didn't, and she went to work. And later she found out that she had been just driving off the Bay Bridge when it collapsed. And what she was feeling was the bridge getting ready to collapse. And I said, oh my golly, if you had just left 1 second earlier, if you had stopped at a stop sign, if you had not waited to let a pedestrian go by, I don't know, you could have been on that bridge. Doesn't that just worry you and make you fearful and make you gasp and make you grateful and make you think about how the universe works and how we just never know? And she said, no. She said, I wasn't there and it didn't happen. And there's just this dichotomy in how you look at the world, how much you try to unpack it. And I think that, as I've now put my pencil in your book, that is one of the things that is so amazingly thought-provoking about the Cloisters. It is haunting and it is marvelous. Has it changed the way you look at the world?
I think actually in some ways it has helped me embrace a little bit more of the magical and the woo-woo elements that surround us these days. Like I said, I'm very pragmatic, and so I'm not actually really inclined to believe in tarot cards or astrology or, manifesting, which is so popular these days. And I think that the funny thing is that writing itself is a very kind of mystical and magical process. And so in some ways, this book has really kind of dovetailed with my growth as a writer and understanding that writing itself has this kind of indescribable or ineffable magic to it that you just have to sometimes trust.
That is beautiful and incredibly true, because when we are writing, we are taken to a place that's new, a place that lives in our imagination only, and then we get to put that on paper and take other people into our imagination, which is about as magical as it can get. Congratulations on your book, Katy. I hope you are just floating on air at the acclaim for this. Let's take a couple of questions, Margaret. I know that, great, Andrea Chapman Johnson, welcome, is saying, how much of your background in art and academia are in the book?
It's funny. I think that my background in art history really helped me do a lot of the research for the novel. But as I've had many people ask me, is this similar to your experience in academia? And I think that my experience in academia was decidedly less murderous. So although I think that a lot of my background and research skills came into play in the novel itself, I think my own history as an academic is much more benign, and maybe fortunately, actually.
But it did help you in researching the book to know where to go and what to do and what to look for and what might be important.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm lucky to be surrounded by an incredible community of fellow academics who I've made friends with over the years, and people who were able and willing to help me kind of when I ran into dead ends or had questions. And I think, that's the kind of community that ultimately Anne is really interested in being part of in the novel. And I can understand why it's a really delightful and important and sort of affirming thing.
And everything in this book, I mean, so thematically, everything in this book and everyone in this book is pretending to be someone else. So that veneer of one thing that we show on the outside is very different from what might be underneath. And I love that. I love that in this book. Who else has a question? Did you outline the book? Okay. That's a great question, Renee. Did the characters talk to you and cause you to change any parts or the ending?
Yeah, I wish, Renee, I could outline a book. It would save me so much time. I am the sort of person who has to write my way into a novel, so I'm very inefficient. When I'm drafting, I'll often write an entire draft. The Cloisters had a whole draft that I wrote that I threw out, didn't use a single word of, that I just sat down and redrafted. And I'll do that sometimes 2 or 3 times before I really find the thread of the story that I'm interested in. So I would love, if there are outliners out there who have tips for me, please share them. I would like to find a more efficient way to craft a book. But for me, it's really in the process of kind of writing my way into the story. And so, yeah, it took many revisions to really get to the final twists in the book. I mean, I didn't sort of discover those until I was deep in the revision process.
Wow. Someday when nobody else is around, I'd love to hear what those, because I know they'll all be spoilers, but I can imagine some places where where you thought, that's what happened. Oh, now I see. Let's go on to another question. Did you choose the cover?
I didn't choose the cover, but I love it. My publisher, Atria, they went around and around trying to find a cover. I think it took them much longer than they initially anticipated. And they came to me with this cover. I have the finished copy here of the Cloisters. And I was so excited by the kind of beautiful gold. You can see how shiny it is. I was thrilled by it and the kind of haunting atmospheric vines creeping into the title as well.
Yes, perfect. It's cloistered. That
Yes.
cover is cloistered. One or two more questions. We have time for one or two more questions. How did you pick your, Darlene, how did you pick your characters' names? Family, friends, baby books, contest winners?
Oh, it's a great question. You know, in some cases, they just came to me. I think Anne's name, it really felt appropriate to who she was and where she was coming from. Leo's name was actually a sort of midstream change. I felt like he needed to be a Leo as opposed to the name he was previously. I also think the same is true with Patrick and Rachel. They come really full names come very fully formed to me for whatever reason, and they very rarely change. So, but I will say that I often start before I really even sit down to kind of start writing a draft of a novel. I'll often pick names that just, I mean, that are terrible. Then I have to go back and really think about, okay, this I'm going to actually write this book now. So what are these names really going to be?
It's interesting, isn't it, how when you get the right name, your character will come to life?
Yes. And if you don't, then they feel very two-dimensional and wooden. It's very strange.
Very strange, but very true. Do you have a painting or piece of art that gives you that claustrophobic feeling?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, off the top of my head, I feel like architecture is much easier at giving that general sense of claustrophobia. But I think a lot of medieval works kind of give you that feeling. And it's one of the reasons why the Cloisters ends up being this sort of perfect medieval museum. Because if you look at a Book of Hours, or if you look at kind of old 12th century Romanesque churches, they have this almost like gloaming feeling to them. They feel like the sun is going down in the book itself. And I think that that's really interesting to me. Also, they tend to be very crowded. So if you look at a lot of medieval works of art, they're full of a lot of characters. They're all very tiny. They're all doing things in the background. And I think, you know, so for me, actually, the thing that gives me the claustrophobic feeling is a lot of medieval art, actually.
That's and so of the book. I mean, the book is full of this sort of medieval treachery, even among the people who are in that environment. One last question. Do we have one last? I know we have a million of them. Katie, Renee is asking, how did you celebrate finishing your book? And how did you know you were finished after all those iterations?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think, well, with this book, I should say I already had an agent when I wrote The Cloisters. The first book I wrote didn't sell, the book that I got my agent with. And so I think writing this book when I had an agent was very helpful because she was able to say, as I sent her drafts, she would say, I think you're getting closer. I think you're getting closer. I think we're there. And so she was really the one who signposted to me that she thought the book was done and ready to go out. And we knew there would be future revisions, but we were in a good place. And so, to be honest, I never celebrate finishing a book. I usually am already excited to start work on the next book. So usually I celebrate by just kind of taking a week off and then diving into the new project. And occasionally I get really lucky and I'm finishing a novel also when I'm on a break from teaching. And then I actually get like a true week off, which is really a joy.
And now I must ask you, what is it that you're working on? I want to celebrate the cloisters right now, but you brought it up.
You know, I'm really superstitious about discussing my books when I'm working on them, but I will say that I'm working on something right now and I see it as kind of, if I had to pitch it as X meets Y, I would say that it's a little bit like Succession meets Lucy Foley's The Guest List. So
Oh, and I can see that perfectly.
family mythology, murders, mysteries, and a very closed atmospheric island setting.
So you're superstitious about that, and you're iffy about tarot cards. Are you superstitious in any other part of your life?
Gosh, am I? You know, I really probably I am, to be honest. I mean, I want to say that I'm not superstitious and superstitions are silly, but I do think I'm superstitious about some things. I mean, definitely, even if I'm not doing anything that's clearly marking the superstition. For example, if you're I live in the mountains, so we're often out skiing a lot of the time, and if you have kind of a successful ski day, maybe you take your left boot off and first
Yeah,
and not
right.
your right boot, and so it's those sort of really small things that you do to kind of mark something that's successful that I also think of as superstitions.
That's not superstitious. That's just logical. That's just,
Right.
or you never say, I'll go for one more run.
Yes.
You're
Never.
done. You're done when you say that. Absolutely.
Yes.
That's absolutely.
That's very true. We never say that. We always say T minus one, and that's the only way, you yeah, say, "I think I'm basically
Yeah,
done." Yeah.
yeah, which proves it's true.
Yeah.
Well, we are out of time. This has been so amazing, Katie. And I forgot to say that there's a giveaway, but you all know that. Did I say that? You all know there's a giveaway. And in 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds, we're going to spin the wheel of fun and see who will win. Not this copy because I'm keeping it, but a gorgeous, shiny new with a dot from the Jenna Book Club sticker on it. We will spin the wheel of fun and see who wins the cloisters. And the winner is Julie Kodama. That's great. And she had made a wonderful comment earlier about your cover. So, Julie, congratulations. And there'll be instructions on your screen about what to do to get your copy of The Cloisters. Katie, stay there for one more minute while I talk about what's coming up next week. And then I'll say formally goodbye. Next week, you all, we are double booked. And we love to be double booked. At 3 o'clock, we have the fantastic Lisa Unger with her brand new Secluded Cabin Sleeps 6. It is really chilling and really a page turner. And it's sort of don't go in the woods in a secluded cabin. I mean, who would do that anyway? But you would in Lisa Unger's book, and it is amazing. And she will be here to talk about that. And then at 4 o'clock, The House in the Orchard, a very different book by Elizabeth Brooks, which has two separate timelines, one in 1945 and one in 1876. So what do you think that is going to be? And I get to start that tonight. So next Tuesday at 3, Lisa Unger; at 4, Elizabeth Brooks. And today we are so thrilled to have talked to the fabulous Katy Hays with her amazing debut novel. Katy, congratulations on everything.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting.
You too. You too. And I can't wait to find out what happens to you. And all of you, when I look over here, I'm looking in the comments. Thank you, Susie and Janine and Julie and Diane and Deborah and Chanson and Sherry and everybody who was here. It is so marvelous to see you every Tuesday here on Crime Time. So you know what I am going to say. It is always safe inside a book, and we will see you next time. Thank you.